Let's get started. I'm not hosting today, but I do have the honor of introducing our new TTP graduate coordinator, Joanna Lewis. Wednesday next week. She's our person. So nice. Complicated problem. Stop by and say hello when you're over here. Yeah, we're just really looking forward to having her.
I'm excited to be here. So yeah, look forward to getting to know all of you.
And she'll
I have
be,
big shoes to fill. I know this.
and she'll be right in Amory's spot. So you'll start singing the details.
Me draw.
All right, Mike.
Hey, now it's my turn to introduce our speaker, Professor Kari Watkins, and most of you already know her. She's from within, and you know that most of the time we have speaker from outside, but from time to time, occasionally we need an internal speaker, and I want to thank Kari to step up to the plate and to give this talk on a short notice. I believe that she'll lead a live discussion about everything transit, what's happening on the campus. Okay, without much ado, and Kari.
Sure. Thank you. So I do know many of you. There's a few who I don't. Maybe some of the new students we haven't crossed paths yet, but I'm one of the newest faculty members here at Davis, and Dylan's leaving me.
I'll be back.
He already told me. I'm one of the newest faculty members here on campus. I came to Davis about a year ago. I was a professor before that at Georgia Tech for 11 years. And prior to that, I did my PhD at the University of Watkins. I'm gonna talk to you guys today. This is actually, when I was asked by Michael if I could do this at the last minute and fill in a gap that we had in the schedule because of a cancellation, I thought to myself, well, I could pull up one of those presentations that probably a third of you have heard me talk about already and sort of make this easy, but I decided instead to spend way too much time, according to my husband, creating a new presentation that pulls together a bunch of stuff that I've worked on in the past, and how I kind of think about how it could work here at Davis and why we have a very special place here at Davis, and how we might build on the amazing place that we actually reside within. And so where this comes from is that the College of Engineering ran a competition for their new, what do they call it, next level research. They had this little tiny startup fund. And I proposed on that, and I was successful in winning this tiny little grant to get me started in creating what I'm calling the Living Learning Campus for Sustainable Transportation at UC Davis. So let me give the preface that I want to talk about this new mini grant, but this builds on a long history of me observing transportation and what is good sustainable transportation and all of those things. And what I have noticed is that we're kind of screwing up, you guys. We don't do such a good job at providing transportation. We're causing lots of issues in society. And those issues include, I should have grabbed the clicker. Those issues include things like this, right? We know transportation accounts for 29% of total US greenhouse gas emissions. And these issues include this, that 42.4% of our population in the US is obese, the adult population, and 19.3% of the children in the US are obese. And you say, what does this have to do with transportation? Well, obesity risk increases 6% with every additional hour spent in a car, okay, commuting in a car. Yeah. So here's another problem that we're causing, right? This poor gentleman, but unintentional injury, mostly from motor vehicle crashes, is the #1 cause of death for people between the ages of 1 and 44. Now, when you get into the upper half of that, it actually is partially poisoning as part of unintentional injury. So our drug and alcohol epidemics feed into this as well. But at those younger ages, the #1 cause of death is motor vehicle crashes, okay? So we're killing lots of people. Whoop, it's not doing its thing.
I hate to say this, but they've been saying that gun violence is the #1 cause of death these days
It's not.
among young folks. So I don't know.
I'm pulling this from CDC's statistics.
Okay.
They're kind of the authority. So, and then the last problem that I want to bring up is this photo, and to tell you that the average American commuter wastes 54 extra hours per year in traffic delays, all right? So there's a lot of problems that we're causing from the way that we get around, and solving those problems would be pretty great. Well, that's exactly what we do. Yes, ma'am?
I was wondering for the first data you showed about the obesity rate, where that study was performed, like on whom, what population group?
The 6% one?
Yes.
That is from a study by, I'm losing his name in my head. He was a professor at the University of British Columbia. I will get it to you. I can't hear.
Todd,
No, it wasn't Todd, but he's not a professor. This is somebody who's in urban planning at the University of British Columbia for a lot of years, and his name is escaping me. Larry Frank. It's Larry Frank. Thank you. Yeah. But I can give you the references for all of this stuff if you guys want it. All right. So here at ITS, we work on solving these problems, right? This is what we do. This is what motivates us. So I want to hear from you guys. What are some of the innovations we're doing here at ITS that might actually solve these 4 things that I just threw horrible pictures of? What do you guys work on every day? Transit, all right. Maha was the first answer. What else? Decarbonization. Okay, how do we go about decarbonization?
Stop fossil fuels.
Okay, so less driving, period. Okay, or other things though. Some of our solutions, what is our biggest center? I thought I saw that Gil came. What do you do, Gil?
Something about EVs.
Something about EVs, and Molly was gonna come. Is she actually here? What do you do, Molly?
Something about automation.
AVs, and then we have 3 Rs. I don't know if any of our 3 R folks are here. What do we do in 3 Rs? Travel behavior, and part of that is like shared modes and things like that, right? Well, how many of you have seen this graphic before? Many of you who take classes with me have seen this graphic before, right? Here is the amount of space that we take up if we all drive in cars. Here's the amount of space that we take up if we're in transit. And here's the amount of space that we take up if we're right sizing the vehicles, using micromobility, bikes being one of those. Now, many of our solutions that we keep touting around here are not solving that problem, or most of the problems that I put before, right? So our beautiful EVs, Gil, it's the same picture. Our beautiful AVs, Molly, it's the same picture. Even the TNCs, Uber and Lyft and whatnot. So what I posit is that if we are going to transform mobility, we have to think a different way. And so what this is tied to is that the College of Engineering has this next level research, and they said that they want us to propose research in these 4 areas: revolutionizing energy systems, strengthening climate resilience, advancing human health, and transforming mobility. But what I really tout is that we actually can do all of these things at the same time. We can transform mobility while also impacting health, while also impacting the climate, and while also reducing our energy intensity. And what that has to do, what we have to do this, is to stop thinking of cyclists as this, and to start thinking of cyclists as this. This is my friend Rebecca, who bikes around Atlanta all the time with 3 little kids on the back of her bike. And she did so terrified most times, right? Because most of Atlanta does not look like this. This is the Atlanta Beltline, all right? And we have to stop thinking of transit as this. And we have to start thinking of transit as this, all right? And the way that we do these things really is dependent on how we use our physical space, okay? So how we use physical space and the priority and separation that we give to micromobility and transit is critical to the future of our transportation system. But how is it that we understand how to best design that physical space? And that's really what I've been trying to do for an entire, 20+ year career. And so I'm going to tell you about some of that research and then eventually how I think that works here at Davis. So the first project I want to talk to you about is called Seeing Like a Bike. In this project, we built contraptions that look like this, and we attached them to people's bikes so that we could monitor where they were biking and try to understand and sense the environment around them as they were cycling, to try to understand more about what might stress them out, what sort of pollutants might they be exposed to, all kinds of different things. So we call this the SLAB box, the Seeing Like a Bike box. And we attached it to bikes like this, and there were front components and rear components of this thing that had all kinds of compute functions, and Arduino, various sensors, etc. And we did things like test air quality around a cyclist with this. And so we set up, this was our testing bike where we put a GRIM, which is a very high quality particulate matter sensor. And then we put our smaller sensors on the bike so that we could look at differences in the two, things like that. So for this particular air quality study, this was one of the things that we were looking at. What we did was we put all these different routes in place where you can see, let me see if the pointer part works. How do I, is it
The little red,
the red one? Okay.
yeah, there you go.
So we put all of these routes together around Atlanta where we were looking, and these pictures are tiny, but at different kinds of infrastructure along each of these routes. And we made sure that people had some sort of protected infrastructure, something where they were mixed in with a higher volume of cars, something where they were on a quiet residential street, trying to understand the differences in air quality that a cyclist might be exposed to. And these are some examples of the averages that we got across these routes, and we were able to look for things like hotspots of where that air quality was worse. And what we ended up seeing from this was there actually was a difference in the amount of PM 2.5 that you're exposed to as a cyclist, if there is cycling infrastructure or not, if you are on a minor road or a major road, and if there was commercial land use or other land use. And let me skip to the next. Well, I think what we were saying there is that part of what we saw in this study, this is not the main point of what I was going to talk about, but was that many of our readings are above this 10 level of PM 2.5, and this shows that there are many people that are actually repeatedly exposed to too high of levels of PM 2.5. Yeah.
Are these statistically significant?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when we ran our actual models, we did regression models to try to understand this. And what we found was that for cycling infrastructure, it was just barely not. And so we saw that cycling infrastructure was, depending on our data, we might have seen it being significant, but it technically was not within the level that we were calling significant. Commercial land use actually was. So where you bike has a lot more to do with the infrastructure that you're placed within, things like that. There's a lot more that I can talk about in this study. Essentially, what we were trying to look at was how this infrastructure would impact things. We found lots of other things, but the point for this presentation is that we can do things like this to instrument the bike, to try to understand, using all of these sensors, the environment around a person. And that level of instrumentation is really key to us understanding the environment that folks are traveling within.
Quick question, this
Yeah.
is in Atlanta?
Yeah.
Generally,
All of this is in Atlanta.
generally speaking, where does Atlanta stack up on its compliance with with federal air quality requirements, because we're, LA is terrible,
Yeah.
parts of California terrible,
Yeah.
you know.
Atlanta has a long history of not being in compliance. I'm gonna embarrass myself right now by not knowing if they're currently in compliance or not. I'm sure somebody else in the room
Well, if you
actually
don't
knows.
know though, that's something,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
Yeah.
it means that, well, you know, it's not maybe horrible,
yeah.
so.
No, I mean, it's like LA, it's a very car-centric city, but like air quality is a very complicated thing. This is not what I'm an expert at. We have lots of other people. What I'm good at is like putting the sensors on the bikes, measuring.
Well, I was just
like,
imagining that if you did this in LA, whether all of those box plots would just go
much higher, yeah,
like that,
very
right?
likely.
So.
Yeah. Although I would equate LA and Atlanta as pretty similar in terms of, I think the basin effect in LA is a little bit different. That makes it even worse, but in terms of being car centric and sort of the environment that the cyclists are operating within, it's gonna be pretty similar, so.
Okay.
I'm trying to look it up right now, but
To see
the
if they're in
website
compliance
is a little
here.
slow. Give me 2 minutes.
So we'll get a report back, yeah.
Yeah, I think the amount of vehicular traffic is really an important factor. In Davis,
Yeah.
if you ride along like Oak, say versus Eureka, your street, you know, it's very different because the cars,
Yeah.
there's more cars going by and it's very, for bike, it's very local.
Well, what we were seeing though, in terms of PM 2.5, the commercial land use had so much bigger of an effect than the pollutants from the vehicles directly next to the cyclists. So if they biked next to a restaurant that was doing lots of like cooking with grease and things like that, we saw the levels spike. Like you could see it happen over and over again. And it had a lot more to do with things like that, and the background, like the things we know that create higher PM 2.5 levels had a lot more to do with the levels we were seeing than the infrastructure itself.
You don't have traffic counts.
We were only putting things in there based on if it was a minor, like the functional classification of the roadway. She had like lots of different functional classes, but we weren't, in this model, we didn't put the actual count at the very time that the person was traveling.
It's in a way, the land use is a surrogate for the traffic counts. If you're in commercial, you typically, the
And so I don't think
classification-
it actually, I think it's more than that. Like I said, it was like restaurants and things like we knew that they were creating, the same reason we're not supposed to be using gas stoves anymore, right? Like the cyclists would go past those places and we would see the level spike.
It's just like go to Sycamore, you smell those coyotes.
Yeah. So, but this is an example of one thing that we can do. And when I left Atlanta, we were just beginning to do work on these instrumented bike studies, and I'm working on an NSF proposal right now where we're hoping to do a lot more with this, that until we get funded, I'm not gonna reveal too many details about, but
Atlanta is an attainment of the
Currently.
PM 2.5 standard.
yes.
But they were ranked as second worst for transportation.
That I believe.
Yeah.
So what else can we do with all of this though? The other part that I'm really focused on is cyclist stress. And so the other thing that we did was we used these instrumented bikes and we had people ride around in Atlanta, a similar loop to the ones you saw for the air quality study. And we had people ride around in Delft, because I had a PhD student who had gotten funding to do a year abroad in the Netherlands. She was working with folks at TU Delft. And so we picked similar routes that had a mixture of a separated facility, a barrier separated residential, bike lanes, mixed traffic in these two cities. For those of you who don't know, Delft is a smaller city, probably somewhat similar in size to Davis. Very bikeable, similar to Davis, so about a 40% cycling mode share. It's a university town. Compared to Atlanta, which is much bigger. It's a pretty large population in the metro area and a pretty small cycling mode sharing comparison. And the infrastructure differences are also pretty immense between the two places. But we were trying to understand, as somebody biked along a route, if they were in our large park in Atlanta, Piedmont Park, what might the infrastructure be like there? What might the stress level for cyclists be? And then as they moved into a cycle track, but on an actual roadway, fairly busy, or took a quiet neighborhood street, or something a little bit busier than that one, but still they were in with traffic. Or if they were on a bike lane on a similar kind of street, or if they were on a major road like Peachtree, with 2 lanes of traffic in each direction and heavy duty traffic on a street like this. Or back to 10th Street where there was no cycle track, and how they might feel about this setting. And so we had each of the participants in this study complete a stress map in which they were telling us how stressed were you at various points along. And this was literally just sketching on a piece of paper telling us in both Delft and Atlanta how stressed were they. And what did we see? Well, not surprisingly, the percentage of segments where people felt low stress in Delft was higher than in Atlanta, but even in Atlanta, the route that we chose, about 40% of the segments they said were low stress. But high stress was almost 20% of the segments, whereas in Delft, it was pretty low. So then we asked people things like, what caused this level of stress? Was it motor vehicles? Was it other cyclists? And you can see there's some pretty big differences between the 2 places. In Atlanta, it was the presence of motor vehicles, the presence of poor pavement, poor infrastructure to separate them from those motor vehicles, the volume of them, etc. In Delft, it was things like reacting to the other cyclists. How many of you came to Davis for the first time and you got on a bike and you realized you were in a different world because trying to bike with that many people around you was not something you had ever experienced before? And that's a situation that they see more in a place like Delft. We also asked them what reduces their stress, and at the top of the list in both groups was high quality infrastructure, having low traffic volumes. And then you start to see some differences fall out, that the people in Delft wanted to be familiar with their route, the people in Atlanta wanted to feel like there wasn't much of a differential in their speed. But this is all survey-based data. There's only so many people we're gonna be able to ask these kinds of questions of. And so what we also did was try to play into having some data from the instrumented bike to try to understand how might using the GPS, how might their speeds play into these stress levels. So what we saw was that if there was a pretty large speed differential, in Atlanta, there was more of a speed differential, and we saw more stress levels on those segments that had a large speed differential between the bike and the adjacent vehicles. And that this was also something they call this a stress reducer, was that if there was a large speed differential, it would reduce their speed if there was, or it would if there wasn't as much of a large speed differential. We also used the LiDAR on the instrumented bike to look at close pass events and try to understand how much that played into people's stress level, their survey-based stress level. And what we saw was that when we didn't have that many close pass events, so this is not something we could look at statistically, but we could see that in Atlanta, there were definitely more of these sort of ones where they were rating it as a moderately or high event, but again, not something we could statistically look at. So our conclusions from this one were that lots of people had looked at stress, but hadn't really asked people questions about what stressed them out. And we were trying to look at what the main components of cyclist stress would be, and it was the presence of motor vehicles, poor pavement, poor infrastructure. And we went on to do many, many other things. In this same study, we started trying to use eye trackers so that we could actually look at where people were looking. The difficulty of doing this on a moving bike is very, very different from trying to use one if you're in a simulator in some sort of a fixed setting. But all of this is to say these are the beginnings of this program that I was trying to put together at Georgia Tech and now want to move here of how do we instrument the bike? How do we instrument the places to understand how the cyclists feel in the environment around them? So that's half of it. The other half of the story is I have a long history of working in transit as well. And there's an app that I'm pretty well known for called One Bus Away. What is this? It's a suite of tools that provides real-time information about where your bus or your train or whatnot is. This is pretty commonplace at this point. When we developed this in 2008, it didn't really exist. And now you guys see the same information if you open up Google, if you go to the transit app, you're getting the same sort of bus arrivals through all of those things. What we're different with One Bus Away is that it's all open source coded, which means that people can code new things on top of this. If somebody wants to create an app that uses this but has other components to it, they can rely on our code base to do so. You can also deploy it for free in any community anywhere across the world. And so we have some agencies that are part of One Bus Away, like San Diego, I think it's Metro. I'm trying to remember what the transit agency down there is, but they had an in-house developer who started the instance of One Bus Away himself. He is part of our whole consortium and he continues to run it on his own using our code base and giving all of their riders in Greater San Diego access to this kind of information. There's an API for developers and the tools are all free to riders. What does it look like? It looks kind of like this. If you've used Google Maps to get transit directions before and you've looked at the arrivals, if you've used the transit app, this is much better, of course. I'm a little biased, but it provides similar information about, I want to take the number 5. Okay, well, the next number 5 is arriving at my particular stop in 23 minutes and then again in 44 minutes, okay? Why did we do this? Well, the whole idea behind the project was to make using transit easier by providing information in usable formats. Really, really easy ways to get information about where is your bus, when is it coming, but then to research and evaluate the impacts of having this information. So we have a bunch of mobile apps. We have an Android, an iPhone app, an Amazon app. You can get it for your Amazon Alexa, all kinds of crazy things.
Kari, did you work with anybody who specializes in this kind of thing that's sort of outside transportation?
Lots of them.
Yeah.
So when we were first doing this at the University of Washington, and then since then, we've had people who looked at like user psychology and things like that who've been involved in the project. There have been people who've done all kinds of user studies. So like the layout of this thing is very carefully thought out. And you see that play out. So the little side story to all of this is One Bus Away eventually was taken over by a nonprofit that we created called the Open Transit Software Foundation. And it grew. It was a PhD project of myself and Dr. Brian Ferris, who now works for Google. And when we created this in Seattle, we had, by the time we both graduated, we had something like, I don't know, 20,000 users, and we felt really bad that we were going to leave these people hanging by both graduating. So we talked to the transit agencies and we said, can you give us a little bit of money so that we can hire somebody to help us spin this up so it's not sort of this side dissertation project? And they did. And so we spun the whole thing up to the point where we now exist in like 10 cities across the world, and we serve more than 1 million unique weekly users, and the project continues to exist more than a decade later as one of the most successful open source projects that has been created. So it's kind of cool. And I still serve as what they jokingly call the chief motivator of the group. But like almost none of the work was done by me. So there's people in psychology working on this. There's all kinds of coders who have volunteered their time or been paid. Like all the transit agencies that are involved. I'm trying to think who else. There's lots of different people with all kinds of different skills who've made this continue all these years. And we're still sort of this ragtag nonprofit, but if you ask people in Seattle, they would much rather use One Bus Away than anything else that's available in the city. So that said, what we were able to do by having this data out there is not only were we serving transit riders and trying to make transit more usable, but all these studies were going on in the background. So the paper that I have the most citations for is the one that gets quoted over and over again by transit agencies, talking about the fact that when you have this real-time information, then your perceived weight comes more in line with your actual weight. If you don't know, we perceive that more time is passing than is actually passing. You guys all know this. You wait in a dentist's office and you say, it's been 20 minutes, they haven't seen me yet. And you look down at your watch and you realize, oh, it's only been 10 minutes. It hasn't actually been as long as I think it has been. So whenever we're in these kinds of situations where we feel like we have no control, we perceive that time is actually passing faster than it is. But having something like real-time information that brings those two things in line. And so this is what lots of people tout to say, we need to spend lots of money to create these systems, put vehicle location on our buses, things like that, so that we can know that when those vehicles are actually coming. And in those same studies, we looked at things like how long their actual weight, how long their actual weight was. So what we saw was not only did people perceive they were waiting less time, they didn't even go to the stop if they have the information in the palm of their hand. So having it here is better than having it on a sign at the stop, because you have to go to the stop to see that. If you have it in the palm of your hand, you can have that extra cup of coffee at the coffee shop you're sitting in or whatever like that, all right? And lots more things. We looked at aggravation level actually didn't change, many other things in that study. Then, so this was my dissertation for those of you who are PhD students and trying to figure out what to do with your dissertation and things like that. This is what I did. And then my first PhD student, what she did was she came to me and she said, One Bus Away is really cool. You didn't answer the big question, does it actually change ridership? What we all want to know is, do we give this information? It's great that people feel like they're waiting less. It's great that it makes them happier. It's great that it makes them feel safer. Do more people take transit? And so we did 3 studies, the biggest one in New York City, where we were trying to understand that. And when we did this in New York City, the great part was that we could get data where we could actually use the places where real time had not been deployed yet as a control for the places where it had. And so the way that they rolled out their real time information in New York was first they had a pilot in Brooklyn, it was successful, and so they started going borough by borough. And they launched in Staten Island, and then they launched in the Bronx, and then they launched in Manhattan, and then they finally added all of Brooklyn and Queens to that. And we could then study how much did ridership increase in these places using the places where it didn't exist as our control. And so what we saw in that study, essentially this is a natural experiment. We used panel regression in order to model this. And we saw that it increased ridership on the order of about 2%. So we could say that having real-time information actually created new riders, or at least created new trips for folks in New York City. We did the same study looking at this in Tampa and in Atlanta, and it didn't bring new riders to the system, because if you don't have a good backbone of a really great transit system in the first place, just having information on your cell phone, oh, the bus is not coming for 30 minutes.
You can know how bad it sounds.
Right? It's not gonna turn you into a rider. There are many more important things that we have to do, and that's what we learned in study after study. A place like New York, absolutely. A place like, Tampa or Atlanta, not as much. But we did see that it actually significantly changed people's waiting experience. So we made happier riders out of the people riding, but we didn't get more people to ride. All right. But what can we use this stuff for? So that's great. Real-time information has existed for a decade. That's kind of old news at this point. How can we actually use this kind of vehicle location data to make transit services even better? And that was what my second PhD student did. So he was actually really interested in concepts of what we call unstable headway dynamics. So this is this concept that if you've got a couple of buses running on a route that's pretty regular, what's gonna happen is you get more people boarding one of those buses, it starts to get a little bit behind. And all of a sudden, bus 2 is getting more and more behind, bus 3 has less riders, it catches up a little bit, and pretty soon it has so few riders that it's picking up that it's right on top of bus 2. Hopefully not literally, but
Like they're trying to make more buses.
they're trying, exactly. We need more buses, if this would work. But so his solution to this was actually to create algorithms and software that would make it so that you could switch routes to being on a headway basis, and that you could use the real-time information from all of the buses on the system and feed that into predictions so that you knew how long to hold each of the vehicles at various points along the route. And so his research used this real-time information for us to create better services. If we can move more towards this kind of service where we're running in a headway instead of at a schedule. So you guys are used to, a schedule that tells you the bus is coming at 7 and 7:15 and 7:30. If we're running on a headway where we just tell you the bus is coming every 10 minutes, then we don't have to put as much buffer in there, and we can be more efficient with how we use the transit system, okay? So this is one use of this data. Another use of this data, I was involved in a project for the Transit Cooperative Research Program called Minutes Matter, a guide to transit service reliability. And what we were trying to do in this was we were looking at why reliability matters to people when they're using transit and how do we make it better. So why does reliability matter? I'm gonna use a joke from one of my favorite mentors, Mark Hellenbeck at the University of Washington. He recently retired, but he loves to tell the joke that the reason that the average is not what we're looking for and we're looking to understand the distribution of something, just think of it as this. If you put a boiling hot bucket of water on one side and a freezing cold bucket of water on the other, and you stand in those buckets, on average, you feel great, right? But do you really, right? You have one boiling foot, one freezing foot. That's why we need to understand the distribution of these things. And so we don't just want to know on average, when does the bus go? On average, how long? But what is the actual reliability of it? Or what is the distribution of how long the trip takes? How long people are waiting? Because we really care about those outliers, because that's how we serve people well. If you're a transit rider and you have this super long wait, that might turn you away from the system where you never use it again. And so reliability is a really important concept in transit service. So by reducing the variability in trip length, an agency can save customers time without actually speeding up their buses. So we did a lot in this study looking at how the declines in travel time reliability that we've seen in transit because of building congestion decade after decade, how that's affecting customers, how that's affecting agencies, how that's affecting the operators. And so we did lots of lit review and sort of interviews and trying to understand each of these points of view. And basically it all feeds into the idea that we have to address and improve reliability for all of these folks. So an agency can be more efficient if they have very reliable service. Customers will be happier if they have very reliable service. Operators will be less stressed if it's more reliable service. So there's all of these important pieces. And what we were saying was that the way to do this well is you have to monitor transit services consistently, diagnose what it is that's going wrong, what's making them unreliable, and then implement strategies to actually fix that. And in this work, we came up with this guidebook that's used by the industry to understand sort of how do you do this process to diagnose, well, what is it that's going wrong? And the way you do this is you have very, very good vehicle location data. So we can say, okay, if, so non-operation is if the bus is not actually leaving the depot when it's supposed to. That's an issue in and of itself, right? That's more agency tied. But we can also look at things like, okay, there's variable travel speed versus variable dwell time, the time that the bus is sitting at a stop. And if there's variability in one of those things, you're going to put in different solutions than if there's variability in the other. And many, many transit agencies don't collect data that is good enough for them to be able to do these kinds of studies. And that's really what we were advocating for in the guidebook, is you need excellent vehicle location data so that you can try to understand, okay, at this particular stop, we lose a ton of time. In this particular segment, we lose a ton of time, and maybe we could put a bus lane in this location to overcome those problems, things like that. So that brings us to Davis. How am I doing on time? Okay, I got it. So my idea here is, I think this picture is one that I love. It shows you, this is the reason that I moved to Davis, California. I wanted to live in a place where I could bike without fear any place that I wanted to go. And I wanted to live in a place where we had a very cool little transit agency that I could use as my playground to try all kinds of cool things in transit research, okay? And that's why I'm here in Davis. So what I pitched to the College of Engineering was this idea of us being this living, learning campus for sustainable transportation. We have a long history of transportation technology research with EVs and AVs and such. We are a bike, and I would dare say transit mecca. Maybe we're not quite there yet, but we could be. And post-COVID, we have the need for more hands-on interactions. We need to be bringing people together to try to get past everything that has happened the last 3 years. And so I think we should be positioning Davis as this living learning laboratory or living learning campus in sustainable transportation to build on all of these things together. What does that mean to me? What that means to me is instrumentation of campus transportation. If we can put low-cost video detection and sensors to monitor bike interactions on campus, there's a lot of things we can learn from that. If we can put low-cost sensors for passenger counting and tracking of buses at Unitrans, there's a lot that we can learn from that. What can we learn from that? Well, we can use this data both internally as well as sharing it with other people to better understand transportation. So we could look at inexpensive methods to count bikes and pedestrians so that we can do better safety models, better understanding of the usage of different kinds of infrastructure. We can look at the interactions between between multiple bikes or between bikes and pedestrians so that we know how safe people are interacting in these environments, all right? With transit, we can look at the intricacies of transit travel times and crowding to understand what makes transit work better, can we have economies within this, at what point does a full bus become a too full bus and it interferes in the operations of transit and slows that vehicle down because getting on and off becomes too difficult, right? Things like that are unanswered questions within this world. And then part of the goal is to operationalize these things on campus so that we can understand the use of infrastructure for better facility design on our own campus. We could improve transit operations on our own campus, and we can improve transit rider information systems. If I spin up one bus away, you guys will have a better way to know when Unitrans is coming, right? And then there's actually this additional long-term goal. Let me see if I can get this thing to play. I love this video. Oh, I don't know if it'll do it. I don't know where I clicked to get it.
There's a link down there.
Well, it should, but I thought when it was in presentation, oh well. You guys can go and look at this YouTube video if you want. It's a very cool drone shot video of this particular roundabout on campus, and you can watch all the bikes interact, things like that. So my other long-term goal actually is I see her back there, in Molly's wheelhouse. And that's why Jean-Chan is actually part of the team that is on this project as well, is that I think the other thing we can do with this data is actually to understand better how AVs will work in the future. Because the way that bikes interact with each other, if you've noticed on campus, you sense the people around you, you slow very gradually, you sort of react in a very real-time way when you're on a bike. And only in a few places in the US do you have those kinds of intricate reactions to each other among cyclists because you have enough cyclists. We could maybe do these studies in Delft or places like that, but we have a unique environment in Davis where we can look at this. And from what I understand in talking to the AV people, this is very similar to how we think that vehicles will be able to interact with each other once we pull signals out of the system and we have them simply sensing each other and reacting and whatnot. So we could actually understand how traffic flow might work as a result of looking at how bike flow works today, all right? So that is the other way that I think by collecting this kind of data that we would actually be able to understand more than just biking and transit. Molly?
Yeah, and I love this, and also I'll just say that, like, you know, another option is, you know, UCLA has a smart intersection, which they've equipped with LiDAR, because they're using the actual, like, you know, intersection to be the, you know, the brain, and so it can see much better than, you know, from a high vantage than the vehicles can. So you can instrument the bikes and the vehicles, but you can also instrument the infrastructure on campus, and that could provide some really cool data.
Kara, I think, you know, we can talk to campus and try to instrument the traffic circle completely.
Yeah.
You know, with cameras, other sensors.
That's what they think I'm doing with my $20,000. So it doesn't go very far though. So we'll see if that's how far it got. But that was the idea that I presented to them basically.
Because to have a drone, you have to get approval from a.
Yeah,
community.
now the goal, what I pitched to them was like that we're actually gonna try to use video detection and sensors to do these things. And so the first phase of it I see in my mind is that we're looking at what kind of equipment works well, and this ties well to a Caltrans project that Dylan already has where Caltrans wants us to be looking at this so that they know what kind of equipment should they be putting out there to count bikes. And so we're testing this for them once that contract gets going anyway, then we're gonna see which sensors are the better ones and we're gonna try to put them on campus in various locations. So that's part of what I'm gonna, like the first steps of what we're gonna do. And the other part of what I'm doing is I'm paying an undergrad to get an instance of One Bus Away up and running. And so you all will hopefully have better information about when buses are coming. But the cool thing is that at this point, because it's a research project, we have things built into One Bus Away, like we're pulling tracking data about people who use the app. If you opt in, we say, you know, are you willing to be tracked when you turn on our app? And if you say yes, then I can collect data on, you know, when do you get to the bus stop, so I know what your wait times are. I can look at, do you look at 2 different routes and then pick one of them as the one that you've used. I can send short surveys out to you to ask you travel behavior questions and things like that. So there's a lot that we can do with it if we get One Bus Away, whereas like, you know, sending data to Google and the transit app, like we have no control over that. If we have our own product that's being used here, then we can use it for research in addition. So that's the other way that I want to use the money from the college.
So do the buses currently have sort of minimal instrumentation where you know all of their locations like you need? That's already there.
Not like I need.
Well, okay.
So all of Unitrans buses are equipped with vehicle location that reports SmartCast here. Where's SmartCast? It's every minute, right? Every 30 seconds. So we get a location every 30 seconds. That's not frequent enough for us to do things like the dwell time studies that I was talking about.
Okay.
So we're probably gonna have to eventually add more instrumentation to the buses on campus so that Marcus is actually funded by Unitrans. So his PhD is being paid for by them so that we can do research on campus in all of these things. And so some of his later projects might involve things like, you know, do we need to put additional sensors on the buses so that we can see more on a second by second basis what's happening? And then, you know, see what the results of that are, and is it a worthwhile investment for other transit agencies to do this so that they can do these kind of dwell
But
time
if you get your
studies?
one bus thing operating,
Yeah.
as long as you have some minimal ridership, get more data that way.
We can get data through One Bus Away too. It would be different from this, because with the smartphone, you're not getting better than the 30-second vehicle
Oh, you're
location
not?
data
Okay, I
anyway,
didn't
no.
know.
No, unfortunately.
I see.
So, and most of us leave our phones on low batteries, so you don't get super great, like, I can tell if you're waiting at a bus stop for 5 minutes, but like, I can't see the intricacies of the vehicle the way that we would want to for this other instrumentation. So let me get to my last, before you guys, you're already jumping to my, okay, so my big questions for you guys, I'm happy to take questions, but what I wanna ask you guys is how else do you think we might create this type of living learning lab at UC Davis? I'm happy to take your ideas about the bike and transit sides, but I think there's even more than that. And so I want to probe your thinking about, we live in this area where, you know, Davis is this sustainable community that could be representative to many, many other places. So how can we use this type of concept for lots of big ideas on campus? So, and here is me, and I'm happy to take questions.
I just thought this would be an appropriate time to bring up the campus travel survey, which if you got the email, please do the survey. So just, I mean, I think that is a really nice compliment to what you're talking about, because it's different kind of data.
Yep.
But it's also a great example of the partnership between transportation services on campus and ITS Davis, because again, like this Unitrans deal, transportation services is paying a student to do the campus travel survey.
And there is a wealth of data there that if you guys talk to Susan.
Yes, and so we've
interesting.
actually been doing that for, I think, 12 years at this point, and it originated with a student had the idea to do that. So we've been doing some campuses living lab for quite a while. So.
What about the surrounding community?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I was just real proud of the community during the pandemic when the testing program, and I mean, our entire, it was Davis. It was the entire integrated stuff, Davis and UC Davis.
I mean, Unitrans is Davis and UC
Exactly.
Davis, right? So the beauty of that is that we're not just looking at student trips and travel to campus, but we can look at other aspects. If we put all of these things in place for Unitrans, it means more than that. I think eventually we would have to think beyond our little world of Davis. How many of you commute from places other than Davis to get to the university?
If you go YOLO bus, it gets depressing.
Really? Is that it?
Just me.
Raise your hands high. Who commutes from other places
A lot
than,
of them do.
okay, yeah. So, I mean, it's not just our little world. There's lots of other places. And I mean, I probably could talk Autumn into letting me instrument YOLO buses as well. But yeah, I think we have to move beyond it. But at the very least, looking at Davis, right? Because the model is not just campus. The model is Davis. Like the bikeability, all of those things, that comes from the city as well. So.
But it's a little easier to do creative things on campus.
Yes.
Which I think is part of the power of what you're talking about.
I think I saw Gil. I'm gonna cut you off, David, so we can get other people to jump.
Very quick, next week, UC Davis is hosting the, I think the fifth Global Energy Management Workshop, which bring campuses from all over the world to talk about how to bring university campuses to zero emission and zero net energy by the goals they have. And they are doing really great work with the staff of the different universities and the researchers and faculty. And we should probably try to kind of sneak in and learn from them and maybe even use the same network for the transportation side of things. It's already it's similar idea, it's running for 5 years and UCOP is supporting it. So we need to kind of sneak in and find a way.
Okay. Kari, you know, we did an experiment on the transit signal priority at Hutchinson and the roof a couple of years back on an asset project.
Okay.
I think the Unitrans is equipped with traffic signal priority and some of the traffic lights are already equipped, but we just didn't have a city traffic engineer or so busy that they really didn't turn it on.
Okay.
So maybe there's a low-hanging fruit that
Yeah,
to
that would
improve
be
the
great.
Unitrans service.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the whole idea of the Living Learning Lab is I'm gonna try to convince people of things like, you know, if we're gonna put signal priority in place, let's try it with, you know, green extension, red truncation, like, you know, like, let's try different versions of this and see what works well and what's amenable and what do we do to traffic flow and, you know, things like that. I think a lot of times the city traffic engineer is only willing to go so far. And so sometimes there has to be a little bit of pushing there that, you know, we're a research institute. We want to try some crazy things, even if, you know, as long as we can keep everybody safe as a result of what it is that we're trying, if we're really pushing for something like that. So
Another challenge is to get good numbers, good counts for pedestrian and bicycles. That's almost universal. And so how to, although there's companies claim they have good data, but when you look deeper into the data.
That's what we're hoping to do with this Caltrans project, is to look deeper into the technology that's available for bike impact counting. And a lot of the companies are doing it video based now. And they're saying that this is much, much better, but we're gonna try out sort of the major ones at various intersections and see how well it works.
Yeah, it's the cost and accuracy.
Yeah, first, like, thank you for what you're doing. Well, that was, maybe a basic idea compared to what others might say, but yeah, surveys, a lot more surveys, jumping off from getting data from more people that walk or people that bike. And from mom that bikes with the baby. There are two things, like the inner circle of Davis is safe, but you go a little bit outskirts and it's, you know, I live on pole line and people towards Woodland go at 40 plus.
Yeah.
And they just go in and out of the bike lane and there's just a paint, when there's paint.
Yeah.
And if you, like, bike paths are, you go up and down.
Yeah.
It's easy to really like even fall.
Yeah.
And in campus you can fix a tire, but outside I have to put the bike in the car to get it somewhere to fix it. So it might be low hanging fruit. I'm gonna connect that to the project we did in summer in the inclusive mobility in the course in Europe that Giovanni invited us. It was expensive but worth it. And at the end we had to make a project, and our project was how to unlock active mobility.
Okay.
And we thought like the bottleneck is a young family, because that's what you're the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
So if you get like a young family off an SUV, you get everyone.
Yeah.
Because it's basically similar, it's like a temporary disability. So the measures you use for a wheelchair or different kinds of active mobility aids are similar, like 1.5 meters.
Absolutely.
So just adapting. We did a whole day in Ghent, Belgium, walking around as if we were blind people, or people who couldn't speak, or people, right, or more than one disability, and not even, you know, like 2 blocks and you couldn't follow with a stick where the stop was for the bus. So I think there's a lot of, and there's a beautiful comparison. A bridge might be 5 million, and adding little ramps to every, you know, invest cheaper, and then you give much more access. I don't know if I'm making sense. If we separated the bike lanes, at least to the city limits, and then maybe even more signs, because I had people come from other places and say, I love Davis, but I hate the students and I hate the cyclists. So people will like drive really fast into the city. So again, like I think there's like danger at the age of surveys and safety.
Okay, so to surveys, I would say, I think that relates back to what Susan was saying, that we do the campus travel survey. They are amenable to adding additional questions, a couple on a year by year basis, if there's particular topics that we're interested in understanding better. You know, if it's something related to cyclist safety, although there were questions in there on cyclist safety. So
Mostly about what's going on campus now with all the scooters, e-bikes.
But I think that there are more, like, that's what I said about, like, it doesn't help the cyclist piece, but with One Bus Away, we could do short surveys where it's like, you know, I see that you're waiting at a bus stop. You know, will you answer this 5-question survey about your waiting experience, or, you know, things like that, right? On the cyclist side of things, I would go less in the direction of the surveys. I think the surveys are great, but I think where I'm more so going is this idea of the instrumented bike, things like that. Can I understand when you're stressed by using, you know, various monitors, heart rate monitors and things like that? Can I understand what about your environment is stressing you out? And can I use that data together to design infrastructure?
They presented on the stress levels, and I think there was variations by gender, but I think just one street, Eureka, right?
Eureka? That's my
Eureka.
street. That's where I live. I can tell you all about the stress on that
In
street.
general, that the stress levels were high. I guess if we already have some of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. To translate it maybe into pilots, when I was at a micromobility WRI NGO for micromobility,
Yeah.
what worked is to make a pilot, I feel silly telling this to professionals, but like a pilot that worked and then
Yeah.
that can jump
And
into
then
the
they try
policy.
to make it a full, yeah, absolutely.
More
full-on
pilots.
project. Yeah. And I mean, I think that there's a long history of faculty working with the city on these very kinds of things, right? So a lot of what I'm saying up here is not totally new. Like, I think the only thing that's really new is this idea of instrumenting, you know, various aspects that I'm interested in. But I think the other part that's new is that I think we need to sell ourselves a little bit better as this place that is this sort of come to Davis and you can see a picture of what sustainable transportation is. I don't think we want lots of people from the outside coming in, but I think we want at least people who are interested in studying these things to come and see what we have created here. I think those of us who live here for a long time start to forget that. But you're right, that it's not yet perfect. And I totally agree that with children, I mean, that's when I became a huge disability advocate, was when I pushed a wheelchair around and I saw how important ramps at roadways were when I was trying to push a stroller. And all of a sudden you can relate a lot to somebody who might be in a wheelchair and having those same problems. And the great thing was that I'm able-bodied, so I could just pick that stroller up and put it on the sidewalk. Well, if you're in a wheelchair, you're not gonna be able to do the same thing. So it's a point well taken, but I do think that the kind of infrastructure that we have in Davis, there's study after study showing that like that dedicated, protected infrastructure, the paths that we have, the places where we've done it right, where it's not just a bike lane, have shown that this is the way we need to be designing. But I think there's still some intricacies to it that we don't know yet, and that's what I hope to get from data like this. So, yeah.
I wanted to go back to your previous slide, hear my thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is super cool. But many people would know that I'm on the advisory for unit trends, so I get to hear a lot of interesting things.
Okay.
One thing Jeff was talking about, manager was that the fleet of the unit buses is like rapidly getting electric buses.
Yep.
And that's cool for a lot of reasons. I like them because I don't feel like I'm being suffocated when I bike next to one of them.
Okay.
But interestingly, like their fuel costs are not projected to, they're still going up, even though maybe in the next month, a third, maybe it's a quarter or a third of their fleet is going electric. But like, that might be an interesting topic to look into. Because one of the things like big savings that promising doesn't seem to be materializing.
I didn't hear the last part. Is what for you?
Their fuel costs are still increasing.
Right.
Despite the fact that a third of or a fourth of their fleet.
Because the fuel, it's not that the electricity is that expensive, it's that the buses that they still have left that are not yet electric, fuel costs are going up so much that overall it's still.
Yeah, so
Okay.
like the savings, they're not realizing enough savings.
Right. They're not replacing them fast enough with the EVs to get away from the rising fuel prices.
Yeah, I don't know what the.
Yeah, I mean, I think so all transit agencies get Federal Transit Administration funds and they are able to use these for things like bus replacement. And so that's how Jeff is doing this, is whatever new buses he buys are EVs, but he can only replace so much of a percentage of the fleet at a time, right? So it's gonna take him time to get through all of them. And the great thing is that my understanding from Gil, I've been schooled well on all of this, is that the hard points are that first bus, because we have to create all of our infrastructure to fuel it and all of those things. And then the last like 10-ish% of the fleet, because usually there are some routes that are very hard to operate on a bus that is only charging overnight. And so we're gonna have certain routes that are difficult. Jeff tells me that he doesn't have the last 10% problem. Davis is small enough that all of Unitrans routes can be like his service schedule that he currently operates. He can get through the whole thing and only charge overnight, which is great because there are some agencies that would have more difficulty. But I think you're absolutely right. I don't know that there's anything we could do through you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how we would help that along, because I think buying a bus is really expensive, so we're not gonna help him buy buses any faster or things like that.
No, I was talking about the operational cost, not the
Okay.
buying cost. It's like in theory, the operational cost, it's interesting that the savings from like charging on gas so he's not realizing electricity savings is what it sounds like.
Okay. Or he's not realizing it enough because gas prices are going up so much that it's not enough to recover that, is what I'm guessing.
No, but a large portion of the electricity is this next year.
Yeah, I think a couple years, right?
No, like in the next month, they have their.
I know they're getting another big shipment,
Yeah.
yeah.
So they should have like 8 buses, electric buses running.
Yeah, but 8 is not even half of how many buses are there in the fleet? I think it's like 20 plus.
It's not enough.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a third of the fleet.
a third, okay, so he's got 24, yeah,
Something like that.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
If you're looking for an interesting kind of experiment, so on big chunk of Covell, there's a spot where there's a painted bike lane and then a separated like bike path,
Yes.
which always seemed a little excessive to me.
Why do we have
Just
both
make
of
sure
them?
both,
Because
but-
we're Davis,
Yeah,
right?
But with that amount of space, if there are any like interesting ideas on how to change the composition, change the sign, change
Yeah.
the separation or something.
Yeah.
It seems like a good spot where there's
Yeah.
ample room to physically put different ways of separating, marking
Absolutely.
stuff.
I think we could. I also think we could do a very cool study looking at who is on the path and who is
I was
in the
gonna
bike
say,
lane.
During the day, you go in because it's faster.
Yeah.
Where the cars are. At night, they're gonna kill you. And that's how it's like they turn and they like honk, it's like,
Yeah.
it's a bike lane, so it's better, then you use.
But the existence of both of these to me is a
Yeah.
great path to understanding behavior, right? Like,
So
yeah,
I'd go by them, sometimes I'd use the bike lane on the street because for a while the path was really bumpy, like it had not
Yeah.
been repaved, but it
Yeah.
looks like they just repaved it
so
like
now
2
it's
weeks ago.
nicer.
I
Yeah.
haven't ridden by there in a while, but yeah, it's just, it seems like an interesting like resource that if you're looking for a creative way or place to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point earlier, I mean, now what's being talked about in our industry is we have to design for all users. And the way when I teach this stuff, what I say is, I'm trying to design a bike facility that I can have my mother biking behind me and she's no longer this age, but 6-year-old biking in between the two of us. And when I'm designed for that situation and I feel comfortable with it, then I've hit it, right? Like, but it would be fascinating to see, even if an individual person, because I could see me making a choice, because it's probably gonna be faster for me to bike in the bike lane adjacent to the cars. That if I had certain people biking with me, I might be on the path. And if I was biking by myself, I might be in the lane. So you would even see me picking different infrastructure based on the setting.
Well, if I can add, I use the bike lane when I'm on my e-bike,
Oh, because you're going faster.
because I'm going fast, and the bike path is not a bike path, it's a shared use path.
Right.
Right, so actually having both might help us with this problem that we now have these multiple modes
Yeah.
going various speeds.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to see.
So I'm sorry, I missed most of it, but I was just on the call talking a lot about this, so I thought I'd speak up. I was talking to somebody who is a skateboard advocate, and he has a skateboard company. And his vision is that the skateboard is the perfect vehicle for understanding universal design because of the small wheels and all these kinds of things. And His vision is that that we should not be calling things bike lanes and sidewalks.
Yeah.
Because of course, calling something a sidewalk alienates a skateboarder who, people say, well, you're not supposed to be on the sidewalk. His vision is that it should be speed differentiated. So these are the slow paths, the medium speed paths, and the fast paths. And then if we have signals that are timed such for the medium speeds, then all of a sudden the fast speeds aren't very fast anymore.
Yep.
Because they're getting stuck at the signals and the medium speeds are just flowing nicely. And you all of a sudden traffic calms the whole transportation network in your urban environment.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
really cool vision.
In Atlanta, they call them lit lanes. I don't think this has been picked up in the public, but the advocacy group calls them lit lanes for low impact transportation.
That sounds like they've got a light though.
Yeah. I understand that younger people than me use the phrase lit as like something's cool or whatever, so I think that was what they were trying to play off of. So, yeah.
So they were suggesting we instrument people on skateboards or people on the one-wheel skateboards. There's like a mixture between skateboards and e-bikes. I've seen those on an actual, shared use bike, or not. I've seen one on a roadway bike lane, and it's scary to see that, especially if you're not helmeted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just had a massive recall on those things too. I'm not sure what the deal was, but.
Couldn't get me on one, but lots of people think I'm crazy because I bike everywhere that I do, so. What other questions or ideas do you guys have?
So you talked about improving the reliability of transit agencies. So
Sure.
a student run organization like Unitrans, I was thinking how you can improve, say, like running late or waiting time, like how you can improve like something that takes like minimal instrumentation, like do you think like more training, but then route planning, would that be helpful in like more shorter term that could like affect the improvement like in a very short time?
Yeah, so most of the research looking at reliability on transit shows that the drivers have something to do with it, but it's actually a fairly small amount, and that there are differences in sort of driver behavior. I actually had a visiting PhD student from Chile, and his research was all about how much the drivers impacted things, and it was definitely a part of it. And so it could be training, but part of it is also just like your nature as a person, that some of us are more aggressive personality. Like, you're not, a lot of these things you're not going to train out of a person. Much of it has to do with them getting caught at a signal or how long it takes it to stop or things like that as well, though. Where he found that this really mattered was when you were running what's called a headway-based service. So this is what I was talking about before, where instead of a schedule, we're just trying to run it so a bus comes every 10 minutes, right? In that kind of service, you actually want to organize your drivers so that you don't have like the aggressive driver and then the not at all aggressive driver and having them every other one. Like, there were better ways to actually put them in order so that you could make sure bus bunching wasn't as big of a problem. It was pretty cool research. I don't know how far you would get with further training. Like, I think the drivers at Unitrans are pretty well trained because of Jeff's fear that if there was ever a fatal crash, the whole thing would be shut down and we would no longer have student drivers. There's a pretty comprehensive training program to make sure. So I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting to see if there were things that we could do to improve reliability just through driver training. So.
I mean, there could be other ways like better route planning with them changing bus stops.
Yeah.
Things like that.
So that's the kind of thing that I'm mostly getting at from what we had in the TCRP report and what evidence shows, and that I think we could do a lot with the research is, route planning. Are there places within Davis that it makes sense for us to have an exclusive bike lane? Anderson, there's a lot of transit service on Anderson. Is there something that we could do there? Pull bikes off, so we put bikes on a parallel street. We don't have bike lanes on there, instead we turn into transit lanes instead so that we can get really fast travel times. just, one place that we might think about this. Or at individual stops, are there ways that we can redesign the stops so that boarding is much, much faster? I understand there's certain stops that Unitrans serves where it's like, you're like behind the bushes kind of thing, and by the time you get out there, like, you've lost whole minutes on the travel time of that vehicle. And that's the thing that having the like really, really good vehicle location data can tell us, is where do we put these improvements in? So, yeah. I feel like there's something happening and maybe should I stop? Should I bring things to a close?
There's gonna be something happening.
Keep going? Okay.
There's more questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking like, how can we incorporate the movement of goods into these kind of initiatives?
Oh,
We've been talking about.
that's my question for you. How do we do that?
So I was thinking that maybe we can take this as a laboratory for promoting other alternatives such as cargo bikes or the small packages.
Sure.
We have these big trucks carrying a lot of air and the small boxes. Why don't we think in changing this kind of mode of transportation for cargo bikes, where we can also promote these bikes instead of big trucks?
So
And also we have Amazon, for example, moving a lot of packages on private cars, basically, that are increasing the CMT also.
yeah,
So maybe we can change that for other more sustainable alternatives.
I think absolutely. Help me help Jeff to push for us to move towards more just on campus. Because we still have trucks driving around campus and I'm like, we shouldn't have this at UC Davis. Like, we could absolutely shift some of that. And even what I've talked to him about is like a cargo vehicle loan program, so that if you are trying to get things across campus, that you don't, borrow your friend's car that day, that you can just borrow a cargo bike to get stuff from one place to another because you're trying to move all your test tubes or whatever, various things that happen on campus. So I've been trying to talk Jeff into some of these things. Bike Jeff, not bus Jeff.
Yeah, no, and then there's also like the autonomous spots, Miguel has that stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, Miguel and I worked on a small white paper.
Okay.
There are a lot, Miguel's most versed in this, in terms of logistics challenges and cost effectiveness and what types of environments, but I think Davis is potentially a good environment, especially campus.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of culture change to talk to the university about grounds, and bikes with that. It's a tough stuff.
Yeah.
Especially with like electric gators.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, they're used to using gators, just putting gas electric gators, like, no behavior change at all.
Yeah.
Oh, gator, those like green loud things that landscape.
ATV type things, right?
Yeah. But, yeah, they're kind of like these big heavy duty golf carts. It is an improvement, but they're, $24,000 and e-bikes are probably.
Well, clearly there's a good bike and transit crowd here, and I think we do have a timetable and for the next event. Well, we thank Kari for very exciting